Today, we're going to break down a framework that's really changing the game in education. It's called outcome-based education. Now, I know the name might sound a little academic, but the idea behind it is actually super simple and honestly pretty powerful.
Seriously, just think about it for a second. Whether you're trying to launch a new product, plan a vacation, or even just whipping up dinner, what's the very first thing you do?
Yep, that's it. You figure out what you want the final result to be. You decide on the destination before you start planning the route. It just makes sense, right? It's common sense.
And that, in a nutshell, is outcome-based education, or OBE. Instead of just starting with a big list of subjects and kind of hoping it all works out, OBE flips the whole script. It asks, okay, when this is all said and done, what do we want our students to actually be able to do? Then, and only then, it designs everything, the classes, the projects, the exams, working backwards from that specific goal.
So to really wrap our heads around this, we're going to use a simple analogy for this whole explainer: building a house. Trust me, it's the perfect way to see how all the pieces of this framework fit together so neatly.
All right, so let's dive into the 5 key steps of the OBE blueprint. We're going to walk through each one all the way from that initial idea to making future upgrades.
First up, we have outcome-based planning. You can think of this as the dreaming phase. In our house analogy, this is where you decide, do you want a cozy little cabin in the woods or a giant modern mansion? In education, the big question is, what should our students be able to achieve? We are defining the absolute vision for who that graduate will be.
And here's where OBE gets really practical. Let's take a civil engineering program. The big, long-term goal might be something like graduates will work effectively on construction projects. But that's kind of vague, isn't it? So we break it down. To achieve that big goal, they need a very specific, measurable skill, like being able to design a simple reinforced concrete beam. See that? We went from a big idea to a concrete target we can actually aim for.
Okay, so we have our target. Now what? Step 2 is the outcome-based curriculum. Once you know what kind of house you want, you don't just start nailing boards together. You need a detailed blueprint. For education, that means we ask, how do we design our courses to actually achieve that outcome? This is where we map out the whole journey.
So, if you want to teach a student how to design that concrete beam, you don't just toss a textbook at them and hope for the best. You build a curriculum specifically for it. You lay the foundation with courses like engineering mechanics. Then you get more specific with strength of materials and RCC design. And crucially, you mix in hands-on stuff like practical labs and fieldwork. Every single piece is there for a reason, to build towards that one specific skill.
With that blueprint in hand, it's time for step 3, outcome-based learning and teaching. This is the construction phase. The plans are done, now you have to actually build the house. So the question becomes, how do we teach in a way that actually helps students achieve those outcomes?
And this is where you see a huge shift in how teaching is done. It's not about passively listening to lectures anymore. It's about active doing. To learn beam design, maybe students get a real-world problem, like designing a beam for an actual local building project. They're working in teams, getting exposure to how the industry works. The learning becomes real and active, not just theoretical.
All right, step 4. The house is built, but is it any good? Is it up to code? You got to bring in the inspectors, right? Well, that's outcome-based assessment. The question here is simple but critical. How do we measure what our students have actually achieved? We have to check if they can really do the thing we set out to teach them.
And what's key here is that the assessment isn't just one big, scary final exam. It's got multiple parts. Sure, there's a written test on the theory, but there's also a practical test where they have to literally draw the beam design, and then a full project report that's graded with a clear rubric. You're getting a complete 360-degree view of what they can really do. And that brings us to our final step, outcome-based quality improvement. You know how even when a house is built, you're never really done? There's always a new project, an upgrade, a fix. It's the exact same idea here. For any educational program, we have to constantly be asking, how can we do this better?
This is where all that data from our assessments becomes pure gold. Let's say we find out that students are really struggling with that beam design project. You don't just slap a failing grade on it and call it a day. You ask why. Maybe the way we're teaching it isn't clicking. Maybe they need more time in the lab. Or hey, maybe bringing in an expert from the field would give them the context they're missing. You use that feedback to make the whole system better for the next time.
And that right there, that leads to maybe the most important part of this whole thing. This isn't just a straight line from 1 to 5. No way. It's a loop. It's a cycle that's always in motion. See how this works? Everything you learn in Step 5, the improvement phase, doesn't just disappear. It feeds right back into Step 1, the planning phase for the next batch of students. The assessment tells you where you need to improve, and that improvement helps you plan better. It's a living system that's designed to get smarter over time.
Let's make this super practical. You see a low pass rate in a tough subject. That's a red flag raised by your assessment. The system then forces you to analyze why it's happening. And based on that analysis, you come up with a real solution, like updating the course material or trying a new teaching style. It's not just guessing. It's a structured, logical way to fix problems and get better results.
Okay, so you might be thinking, a system this organized must have some specific tools to make it work, right? And you'd be correct. It's supported by some really smart, well-established ideas in education.
Probably the biggest one is a concept called constructive alignment. Now, it sounds super academic, I know, but the idea is actually dead simple. Everything needs to line up. The way you teach should directly prepare students for how you're going to test them, and both of those things should be aimed squarely at the goal you set way back at the beginning.
Here's a perfect example. Think about it. If the goal, the outcome, is for students to analyze soil properties, does it make sense to just have them read a chapter about it? No. You get them in the lab, getting their hands dirty. And then, how do you test them? Not with a multiple-choice quiz, but by having them write a formal soil testing report, just like a professional in the field would. The outcome, the teaching, and the assessment, they're all perfectly constructively aligned.
Okay, so let's zoom out. We've walked through the blueprint, step by step. Why does any of this really matter? Why is this so important?
It all comes back to this one fundamental idea. It's about having clarity and purpose. It's about making sure that learning isn't just collecting a bunch of random facts, but a deliberate process that builds real, tangible skills. It's about making sure that when students graduate, they're not just full of information, they're actually ready to do things, because their entire education was built, from day one, with that end goal in mind.
And that leaves all of us with a really big question to think about. This framework gives us the how, but it's up to us, educators, industries, all of us, to decide on the what. As the world keeps changing faster and faster, we have to keep asking ourselves, what are the really essential skills, the crucial outcomes we should be building our education around? What does the blueprint for the future really need to look like?